It started as a game, a cold, rainy Friday night, the kind that begged for something thrilling to pass the time. Candles flickered in the dimly lit room as Ashley, Erica, Sam, and I sat cross-legged around the Ouija board. Erica had brought it from her grandmother's attic, swearing up and down that it was ancient and totally legit. The ornate wooden board was aged, the letters and numbers etched deep, the word goodbye carved at the bottom. None of us truly believed in it, of course. It was just a novelty, something to spook ourselves with. At least that's what we told ourselves as the planchette rested ominously in the center of the board. The rain pattered against the windows, a rhythmic backdrop to our nervous laughter. "Let's just try it," Erica urged, her green eyes glinting with mischief. She always loved pushing boundaries, testing limits. Sam rolled his eyes. "You know this stuff is fake, right? Someone always moves it. Then prove it." Erica shot back, smirking. "Let's see if you're brave enough." Sam huffed, but he placed his fingers on the planchette along with the rest of us. The air grew heavier, silence falling over the room like a thick fog. Erica took a deep breath and began the ritual. "Is there anyone here with us?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. For a moment, nothing happened. We exchanged amused glances, stifling giggles. Then slowly, the planchette began to move. None of us admitted to moving it, but I could feel a slight resistance under my fingertips, as if it were being guided by an unseen force. "Yes," it spelled out, the letters forming a word that sent a collective chill through the room. Ashley's hand shot up from the board. "Okay, who's messing around?" "No one," Erica snapped. "Let's keep going. Who are we speaking to?" The planchette hesitated, then spelled out a name, L-U. "Lucy?" Ashley asked, but Erica's face darkened. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, it's not Lucy." "What does that mean?" Sam scoffed, trying to mask his unease. Erica didn't answer. Her hand shook as she asked the next question. "What do you want?" The planchette moved faster this time, almost jerking under our fingers. "Y-O-U." A nervous laugh bubbled out of Sam, but no one else joined in. The room felt colder now, the flickering candlelight barely piercing the growing shadows. I glanced over my shoulder, convinced I heard faint whispers, but the room was empty save for the four of us. Ashley pushed herself away from the board. "This isn't funny anymore." "Don't break the circle," Erica shouted, panic flashing in her eyes. Ashley froze, her breathing heavy. "What happens if we do?" Sam asked, his bravado cracking. "We don't want to find out," Erica muttered. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, though she hadn't shared them with us before. Never break the circle. Never say goodbye before the spirit does. Ignoring the tension, Sam rolled his eyes and broke away from the board. "This is dumb." The moment he did, the candle nearest him extinguished itself with a soft hiss. Then the others followed, plunging us into near darkness. The only light now came from the faint glow of the street lamp outside, casting eerie shadows across the room. A loud thud came from upstairs, startling us all. Erica's face turned pale. "We're the only ones here." "Decide," she whispered. Another sound followed, a slow, deliberate dragging noise, like heavy furniture being moved. It came closer, growing louder, more oppressive. My breath caught in my throat as the air turned icy. "Ask it what it wants," Ashley whispered urgently, clutching Erica's arm. With shaking hands, we all returned our fingers to the planchette. "What do you want?" Erica asked again, her voice breaking. This time the answer came quickly, the letters sharp and deliberate. S-O-U-L-S. The dragging noise stopped, replaced by a guttural, low growl that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sam jumped to his feet, his bravado completely shattered. "That's it. I'm out of here." As he stepped toward the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang, as though an invisible force had thrown it. Sam stumbled back, his face pale. The growl turned into a sinister laugh, echoing around the room. "We have to end this," Erica cried. "We have to say goodbye." The planchette shot to the word no before we could even attempt it. The laugh grew louder, more distorted, and the shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and writhe as if alive. Ashley began to sob, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "Please, make it stop," she whimpered. Desperate, Erica shouted into the darkness. "We're sorry! We didn't mean to disturb you. Please, let us go!" For a moment, the room fell silent. Then the planchette moved one final time. G-O-D-B-Y-E. The candles flared back to life, the oppressive chill lifting as quickly as it had come. We sat in stunned silence, too afraid to speak. Sam was the first to bolt, muttering something about never coming back. That night, I couldn't sleep. The shadows in my room seemed darker, the silence more oppressive. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. 2 days later, Erica called, her voice trembling. "I think it's still here." "What do you mean?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "There's something in my house," she whispered. "It keeps saying my name." Her voice broke into a sob. "I don't know what to do." The line went dead, and I never heard from Erica again.
Story number 2.
It began with a dare. It always does. Tim had found an old Ouija board in a thrift store and brought it over to the group's hangout, an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. The cabin was falling apart, but its isolation made it a perfect spot for late-night drinking and storytelling. That night, though, the air felt heavy, as if the forest itself disapproved of our presence. "Let's see if this thing actually works," Tim said, his voice laced with false confidence. The board looked ancient, the wood warped and scratched, and the planchette was worn smooth as if it had been used hundreds of times. None of us could deny the unease creeping into our minds, but peer pressure and curiosity are powerful motivators. There were 6 of us: Tim, his girlfriend Sarah, the twins Chris and Claire, and me, along with our friend Jake. We all huddled around the Ouija board, the dim light from a single lantern casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Tim led the ritual, his voice overly dramatic. "Is anyone here with us?" he asked, grinning like an idiot. Nothing happened. We laughed nervously, shrugging it off as a waste of time. Then, just as Tim was about to mock the silence, the planchette began to move. "What the?" Sarah whispered, pulling her hands back. "Stop messing around." "No one's messing around," Tim insisted, though his face betrayed his unease. The planchette spelled out, "Y-E-S." We exchanged nervous glances. Chris, ever the skeptic, leaned forward. "Who are we talking to?" The planchette paused, then moved again. "R-O-S," Claire gasped. "That's creepy. My grandmother's name was Rose." Tim smirked. "Maybe she wants to say hi." Sarah elbowed him, hissing, "Don't joke about that. Ask it something personal," Jake suggested. "Something only Claire's grandma would know." Claire hesitated before asking, "What was the name of my childhood dog?" The planchette moved slowly but deliberately, spelling out D-A-I-S-Y. The color drained from Claire's face. "That's right," she whispered. "But no one here knew that." Jake's voice wavered. "Maybe it's just coincidence. Or maybe it's something else," Sarah muttered. Her eyes darted around the cabin, her unease palpable. Tim, ever the provocateur, smirked. "If you're really here, Rose, give us a sign." As soon as he finished speaking, the lantern flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness. We all froze. The air turned icy, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. A faint whisper echoed through the cabin, so soft it was almost imperceptible, but it chilled me to the bone. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. We nodded silently. The whisper grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't a single voice. It was a cacophony, overlapping whispers in a language none of us understood. Then the planchette began to move again, faster this time, as though in a frenzy. G-E-T-O-U. "Okay, we're done," Jake shouted, pushing the board away. But the planchette didn't stop. It moved violently on its own, spelling the same message over and over. G-E-O-U, G-E-O-U, G-O-U. Suddenly, the door to the cabin slammed shut with a deafening bang. Claire screamed, and Chris rushed to the door, trying to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers turned into guttural growls, filling the cabin with an oppressive, otherworldly presence. The lantern went out entirely, plunging us into darkness. Then we heard it. A slow, deliberate scraping sound, like fingernails dragging along the wooden walls. It circled the cabin, growing louder and closer with each pass. "We need to finish this," Sarah yelled. "We have to say goodbye." "Do it," Jake screamed, his voice cracking. We scrambled to put our hands back on the planchette. "Goodbye," we shouted in unison. The planchette moved violently to the word no. The scraping stopped, replaced by an unnatural silence. Then, a deep, guttural voice resonated through the room, a single word that sent a jolt of terror through every nerve in my body. "Mine." The door flew open with such force that it nearly came off its hinges. Without hesitation, we bolted, tripping over each other in our desperate attempt to escape. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road, panting and gasping for air. When we finally dared to look back, the cabin was dark and silent. But as we turned to leave, a faint light flickered in the window. And there, staring back at us, was the unmistakable silhouette of a woman, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. We never spoke about that night again. The cabin was demolished a year later, but sometimes when I drive past the clearing where it used to stand, I swear I can see that same faint light flickering in the distance.
Story number 3.
It started with a simple question. Do you believe the dead can talk? My friend Lisa asked it one night as we huddled in her dimly lit basement. The question hung in the air, heavy and unnerving. She didn't wait for an answer before pulling out an old Ouija board she'd found in her aunt's attic. I thought we could try it, she said with a mischievous grin. Just for fun. There were 4 of us that night. Lisa, her boyfriend Mark, our mutual friend Abby, and me. The basement was small, the walls covered in faded floral wallpaper that seemed to watch us as we sat cross-legged on the cold floor. A single bulb above us flickered occasionally, casting unsettling shadows. The board was old, its edges fraying, the letters and numbers faded with age. The planchette was cracked but functional. We all hesitated as Lisa placed it in the center of the board. Come on, don't chicken out, she teased. Reluctantly, we all placed our fingers on the planchette. Lisa started, Is anyone here with us? For a moment, nothing happened. Then the planchette moved. Slowly, deliberately, it slid to, Yes. Who are we speaking to? Lisa asked, her voice steady but her eyes wide. The planchette spelled out, Rebecca. Rebecca, Abby whispered. That's creepy. What do you want? Lisa continued, her tone more serious now. The planchette moved again, faster this time. HELP. Mark chuckled nervously. Okay, who's moving it? Seriously. No one, Lisa snapped. Let's keep going. Why do you need help? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. TRAPE'd. Abby pulled her hands back. Nope, I'm out. You can't break the circle, Lisa hissed, her panic evident. Why not? Mark asked, clearly uncomfortable. Before Lisa could answer, the light bulb flickered violently and then went out. The room plunged into darkness. Abby screamed, and I felt a cold draft sweep through the room, chilling me to the bone. What's happening? Mark shouted. A low, guttural whisper filled the air. At first it was indecipherable, but then it grew louder, more coherent. Leave now, it said, the voice unrecognizable and filled with malice. Say goodbye, I yelled. We have to end this. The planchette moved on its own, jerking wildly across the board. Lisa screamed. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed above us, despite the fact that we were the only ones in the house. The steps grew louder, descending toward the basement door. Who's up there? Abby cried, her voice trembling. No one answered. The footsteps stopped at the door, and the handle began to rattle violently. Then it stopped. The silence was suffocating. Run! Mark shouted, grabbing Abby's arm. As we bolted up the stairs, the basement door slammed shut in our faces, the force so strong it made the walls tremble. The guttural whisper returned, louder, angrier. You asked for this. It hissed. Lisa dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. We're sorry. We didn't mean it. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the dark hallway beyond. Without a second thought, we ran, not stopping until we were outside in the cold night air. The house stood silent and dark behind us, but I swear I saw a shadow move in one of the upstairs windows. Lisa moved out of that house a week later, claiming she couldn't stay there anymore. She told me she'd hear whispers at night, voices calling her name. Once, she said, she woke up to find the Ouija board at the foot of her bed, though she'd thrown it away after that night. None of us speak about what happened in that basement, but sometimes, late at night, I think I hear that same whisper, faint but unmistakable. You asked for this.
Story number 4.
It was supposed to be a simple night of fun, a group of college friends gathering for a sleepover at my family's old summer cabin. The place was isolated, nestled deep in the woods, and hadn't been used in years. It had no TV, no Wi-Fi, and barely enough cell service to send a text. Perfect for an unplugged night of games, ghost stories, and laughter. Or so we thought. There were 5 of us. Me, my best friend Mia, her boyfriend Jared, our mutual friend Steph, and Eric, the guy Steph had a crush on. The evening started innocently enough, with snacks and card games by the fireplace. As the night grew darker, Jared pulled out a Ouija board he'd brought along, grinning mischievously. This'll be fun, he said, setting it up on the coffee table. The rest of us exchanged uneasy glances. I'd always thought of Ouija boards as harmless, but something about this felt wrong. Come on, it's just a game, Jared insisted, coaxing us into sitting around the table. Reluctantly, we joined him, placing our fingers lightly on the planchette. Mia, always the bravest of us, asked the first question. Is there anyone here with us? The planchette didn't move at first, and Jared laughed. See? Nothing to be afraid of. But just as Steph began to relax, it slid to yes! We all froze, staring at each other in shock. You moved it, Eric accused Jared, his voice shaking. I didn't, Jared replied, looking just as startled as the rest of us. Mia swallowed hard. What's your name? The planchette moved again, spelling out H-A-N-N-H. Who's Hannah? Steph whispered, her voice barely audible. The planchette paused, then spelled H-U-ERT. A chill ran down my spine. Hurt by what? I asked, the words trembling on my lips. T-E-M. What does that mean? Mia demanded, her bravery faltering. The board didn't answer. Instead, the fireplace suddenly roared to life, and then flames shooting up as though someone had thrown gasoline on the logs. We all jumped back, and the planchette moved on its own, spelling out one last word before flying off the board. Run. Eric bolted to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. It's locked, he yelled, yanking at the handle. It doesn't lock from the inside. I screamed, panic rising in my chest. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, our breath visible in the freezing air. The flames in the fireplace dimmed, casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to twist and move on their own. A low, guttural sound filled the room, like a deep growl, but layered with what sounded like whispers in a dozen different voices. What's happening? Steph sobbed, clutching Eric's arm. Mia grabbed my hand. We need to end this. We have to say goodbye. We scrambled back to the Ouija board, placing our fingers on the planchette despite the overwhelming sense of dread. Goodbye, we shouted in unison. The growling stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. The fireplace went out completely, leaving us in near total darkness. For a moment, I thought it was over, until I heard the sound of footsteps upstairs. Who's up there? Jared whispered, his voice trembling. No one answered. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs one deliberate step at a time. Mia grabbed the lantern, shining its weak light toward the staircase. What we saw made my blood run cold. A figure stood halfway down the stairs, its face obscured by shadows. It was small, no taller than a child, and its head tilted unnaturally to one side. Its eyes glinted in the dim light, staring directly at us. Get out, it said, its voice hollow and echoing like multiple people speaking at once. We didn't need to be told twice. The door, previously locked, swung open with a loud creak, and we sprinted into the freezing night, and not stopping until we reached the car parked a quarter-mile away. We piled in, gasping for breath, and Jared fumbled with the keys, finally managing to start the engine. As we drove away, I glanced back at the cabin. The windows were dark, but for a split second I thought I saw the figure standing in the doorway, watching us leave. None of us ever returned to that cabin. My family sold it a few months later, and I've avoided anything to do with Ouija boards ever since. But sometimes, late at night, I think about Hannah and what or who hurt her. And I wonder if she's still there, waiting for someone else to listen.
Story number 5.
The night started innocently enough. My coworker Alex and I were closing up the bookstore where we worked. It was a quaint little shop on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and coffee beans. We'd stayed late to organize the storage room, a tedious task we'd both been putting off for weeks. It was just after 11 p.m. when we locked the front door, dimmed the lights, and headed into the back. The store was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards or the hum of the air conditioning. The storage room itself was cramped and windowless, stacked high with dusty boxes of unsorted books. Halfway through sorting a particularly heavy box of hardcovers, Alex held up something strange. It was a leather-bound book, old and worn, with no title or markings on the cover. The edges of the pages were blackened, as if they'd been burned. "Check this out," Alex said, flipping it open. The pages were filled with tiny, cramped handwriting, the ink so dark it almost looked wet. "Probably just someone's diary," I said, shrugging. But Alex frowned, his eyes scanning the text. "This is weird." "What?" "Listen to this," he said, reading aloud. "To whoever reads this, beware. The words you speak from these pages have power. They bind, they summon, they awaken." I laughed nervously. "Okay, that's creepy. Maybe we should put it back." Alex grinned, clearly unfazed. "Come on, it's just some old prank. Let's read more." I protested, but he ignored me, flipping through the pages. The further he went, the more unsettling the text became. Descriptions of rituals, symbols drawn in dark ink, and repeated warnings not to read the words aloud. "It's probably a prop from some movie," I said, trying to sound casual, but my stomach churned with unease. Then Alex read a passage aloud. It was short, just a few lines in a language I didn't recognize, but the moment the words left his mouth, the air in the room seemed to change. The lights flickered, and a deep, resonant hum filled the space, vibrating through the walls. "What was that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Alex looked as scared as I felt. I don't know, maybe the AC?" We stood in tense silence for a moment. Then, from somewhere deeper in the store, we heard it. The sound of books falling. It wasn't just one or two. It sounded like an entire shelf collapsing. "No way," Alex whispered. "No one else is here." He grabbed a flashlight, and we cautiously made our way back into the main store. The shelves were intact, but the books on the floor formed a bizarre pattern. A circle with a symbol in the center. It looked just like one of the drawings in the book Alex had read from. "Okay, this isn't funny," I said, my voice rising. "Let's just leave." Before Alex could respond, a low, guttural noise echoed through the store. It sounded like a growl, but it didn't belong to any animal I'd ever heard. The flashlight flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. "Who's there?" Alex shouted, his voice cracking. The growling stopped, replaced by the faint sound of whispers. They were soft at first, barely audible, but they grew louder, overlapping and coming from every direction. I couldn't make out the words, but they sounded angry. Alex bolted toward the front door, yanking at the handle. "It's locked!" he shouted. "But I didn't lock it. Try the back door!" I screamed, my heart pounding. We sprinted toward the storage room, but as we reached the threshold, the door slammed shut in our faces with a deafening bang. The whispers turned into a roar, like a hurricane ripping through the store. "Make it stop!" Alex cried, clutching the leather-bound book to his chest. "Throw it away!" I yelled. "Get rid of it!" Alex hesitated, then hurled the book across the room. It hit the wall and fell to the floor with a heavy thud. The roaring stopped instantly, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. We didn't stick around to question it. With a burst of adrenaline, we managed to force open the front door and ran into the night. We didn't stop until we were halfway down the block, gasping for breath under the glow of a street lamp. The next day, when the store's owner came in, she found the place completely undisturbed. No fallen books, no strange symbols. The leather-bound book was gone, as if it had never existed. Alex quit a week later. I stayed, but I never worked another closing shift. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the store, I swear I hear faint whispers coming from the back room, and every time I wonder what would have happened if Alex hadn't stopped reading.
Story number 6.
It was one of those nights where everything felt just a little too still. I was driving home after a late shift at the diner, the kind that left you exhausted but wired, your thoughts swirling in the quiet. The road I took was a shortcut, an old rural highway that cut through miles of dense forest. It saved me 20 minutes, but it always gave me an uneasy feeling. That night, the unease was stronger than usual. The headlights of my car barely pierced the darkness, and the trees on either side seemed to press in closer, their branches clawing at the sky. There were no other cars, no signs of life, just me and the empty road. About halfway through the drive, I saw it. A figure standing on the shoulder, illuminated by my headlights. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a dark coat that seemed too heavy for the mild weather. He wasn't waving for help or trying to flag me down. He just stood there, motionless, staring directly at my car. My stomach churned with instinctive fear. I slowed down slightly but didn't stop. As I passed him, I couldn't help but glance in my rearview mirror. He was still standing there, watching me. And then he did something that made my blood run cold. He stepped into the road, directly behind my car. I hit the gas, my heart pounding. "Just keep driving," I muttered to myself. "It's fine. He's just some weirdo." But a few miles later, I saw him again. The same man, standing on the shoulder in the exact same pose. It didn't make any sense. I hadn't seen a single car or turnoff where he could have gotten ahead of me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This time, I didn't slow down. I sped past him, my heart racing. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, I was trembling. I told myself I'd imagined it, that it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. But when I pulled into my driveway and looked in the rearview mirror, he was there, standing at the end of my driveway, staring at my car. I froze. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there, his face obscured by the shadows. I couldn't bring myself to get out of the car. My phone was in my bag on the passenger seat, but I was too scared to reach for it. All I could do was sit there, staring back at him. And then he took a step forward. I don't know what snapped in me, but I threw the car into reverse and sped back down the street, my tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get away. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, checking my mirrors constantly. He wasn't there. Eventually, I found myself at an all-night diner on the edge of town. The fluorescent lights felt like a lifeline as I parked and stumbled inside. The place was almost empty, save for a waitress behind the counter and an older man nursing a cup of coffee in the corner. I ordered a coffee too, just to have an excuse to stay. As I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart, I glanced out the window. The parking lot was empty, my car the only one out there. But then I saw it, movement in the reflection of the glass, a dark figure walking past the diner, heading toward the highway. I didn't go home that night. I stayed at the diner until dawn, surrounded by the hum of conversation and the clatter of dishes, anything to drown out the silence. When the sun finally rose, I drove back home, exhausted but grateful for the daylight. I never saw him again after that. But every time I drive down that old highway, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, waiting for the next car to pass by. And I wonder, if I hadn't driven away that night, what would have happened if he'd reached my door?
Story number 7.
The old Victorian house had been empty for years. Everyone in the neighborhood whispered about it, stories of people hearing voices, seeing lights flicker in the dead of night, and even shadowy figures peeking through the windows. But for me and my friends, it was just the perfect place for a dare. It was a chilly Friday night when we decided to sneak in. There were 4 of us: me, Sarah, Chris, and Danny. Armed with flashlights and a ridiculous amount of bravado, we hopped the rusted gate and approached the house. The wooden door creaked as we pushed it open, revealing a dim hallway filled with dust and cobwebs. The air was thick, heavy, and cold. "All right," Chris said, his voice breaking the silence. "Let's make this quick. We go in, take a photo upstairs to prove we did it, and then we're out." Sarah rolled her eyes. "What's the rush? Scared of ghosts?" Chris grumbled, but we all knew none of us felt completely safe. The house had an atmosphere, an oppressive weight that seemed to grow stronger with every step. The living room was cluttered with decaying furniture. A grandfather clock stood against the far wall, its hands frozen at 3:03. As we moved through the house, the floorboards groaned beneath our feet, the sound echoing like a warning. When we reached the staircase, Danny hesitated. "You hear that?" he whispered. We all froze, straining our ears. At first, there was nothing. Then faintly, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from upstairs. "It's probably just the house settling," I said, my voice barely steady. "Right," Sarah added quickly. "Let's just get the picture and go." We climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The second floor was even darker, the air colder. The hallway stretched out before us, lined with doors. At the far end, one door slightly ajar. "That's got to be it," Chris said, leading the way. The room was a bedroom, its furnishings covered in white sheets, long since turned gray with dust. A cracked mirror hung above a dresser, its surface warped. On the bed lay a single item, a child's porcelain doll, its face chipped, one glass eye missing. "Creepy," Danny muttered, snapping a picture with his phone. "All right, let's get out of here." But as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind us. The sound was deafening, the force shaking the walls. "Who did that?" Sarah yelled, her voice panicked. "No one," Chris said, tugging at the door. "It's stuck." The temperature in the room plummeted, our breath visible in the air, and then the whispers started, soft, unintelligible, but unmistakably coming from the doll. Its remaining eye seemed to glint in the dim light as its lips moved ever so slightly. "Did it just?" Sarah began, but she couldn't finish. The doll's whispers grew louder, overlapping, filling the room with an unbearable cacophony. The mirror above the dresser cracked violently, shards falling to the floor. "We need to go!" I shouted, my voice drowned out by the noise. Danny picked up the doll and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a sickening thud, but didn't break. Instead, it landed upright, its head tilting unnaturally to the side. The whispers stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a low, guttural laugh erupted from the doll, filling the room with a sound that didn't belong in this world. The door flew open on its own, slamming into the wall with a force that splintered the wood. We didn't wait. We ran, down the stairs, through the hallway, out the front door, and over the gate. We didn't stop running until we were blocks away, gasping for breath under a streetlight. None of us spoke about what happened that night, but I know we all remember. Sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers coming from the shadows of my room. I try to tell myself it's my imagination. But last week, I found something on my dresser, a porcelain doll with one glass eye, its lips twisted into a cruel smile.
Story number 8.
The invitation had been simple, a handwritten note slipped under my apartment door that read, "Come to the seance, midnight, 73 Brindle Street." There was no sender, no explanation. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity won. I couldn't resist the pull of something so ominous and intriguing. At 11:45 p.m., I found myself standing in front of the decrepit old house. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, with peeling paint, boarded-up windows, and an overgrown yard. But the front door was slightly ajar, and a dim light flickered inside. I stepped into the house, the floor creaking loudly beneath me. The air smelled of mildew and something metallic. Inside, the living room had been cleared of furniture, replaced by a large circular table in the center. Around it sat 6 people, their faces illuminated by candlelight. "Take a seat," a woman in a black cloak said, gesturing to an empty chair. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Feeling out of place, but too intrigued to leave, I sat down. The other participants didn't speak. They barely even looked at me, their eyes fixed on the table. In the center of the table was a Ouija board. The woman in the cloak began without ceremony, placing her hands on the planchette and instructing the rest of us to do the same. Her eyes rolled back slightly as she chanted in a language I didn't recognize. The planchette moved immediately, jerking violently across the board. I glanced around the table, but everyone's expressions were blank, their eyes glassy. The board spelled out, "Help me." "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice taking on a strange, hollow quality. The planchette moved again, this time spelling, "I am here." A chill ran down my spine. The candles flickered, though there was no breeze. The woman pressed further, her tone growing more urgent. "What do you want?" The board didn't spell anything this time. Instead, the planchette pointed to the number 8. Over and over again, it circled the number, faster and faster. "That's enough," I said, pulling my hands away, but no one else moved. They sat rigid, their hands glued to the planchette. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath. The candles extinguished all at once, plunging the room into darkness. Then came the sound, a low growl, deep and guttural, echoing around the room. Something brushed against my arm, and I jumped, scrambling to my feet. In the faint moonlight coming through a crack in the boarded-up windows, I saw the others. They were still seated, but their heads were tilted at unnatural angles, their mouths hanging open as if they were screaming silently. I backed toward the door, my heart pounding. The growl grew louder, accompanied by the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut in front of me, locking me inside. When I turned back toward the table, the woman in the cloak was standing. Her face had changed. Her eyes were completely black, and her skin seemed to sag like it was melting. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice distorted, layered with something that sounded inhuman. The others rose from their seats in unison, their heads still tilted at grotesque angles. They began to chant in that strange language, their voices overlapping. The growling sound was now all around me, closing in. I don't remember how I got out. My next clear memory is waking up in my apartment, my hands trembling, my clothes covered in dirt and something sticky that smelled like rust. The worst part? When I looked at my door, the note was back. Same handwriting, same message. "Come to the seance. Midnight. 73 Brindle Street." I burned it, but every night since, I've found a new note under my door. And now I'm starting to hear the chanting, even when I'm alone.
Story number 9.
The train station was nearly empty when I arrived. It was just after midnight, and the last train was due in 20 minutes. I sat on a cold metal bench, pulling my coat tighter against the biting wind. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long, eerie shadows across the platform. I was alone, or so I thought. A faint rustling sound came from the far end of the platform. I looked up, but there was no one there. The sound came again, this time accompanied by what I can only describe as a whisper. It was so faint I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely there. My stomach twisted, and I tried to convince myself it was the wind. Minutes passed, and the station remained eerily silent. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing against the concrete. I turned toward the sound, and my breath caught. A man was standing at the edge of the platform, staring down the tracks. He was tall, his back rigid, dressed in a long black coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. "Hello?" I called, my voice breaking the silence. He didn't respond or even turn to acknowledge me. He just stood there, perfectly still, as if waiting for something. The footsteps came again, but this time they were behind me. My heart leapt into my throat as I whipped around, expecting to see someone, but there was no one. The platform was empty. When I turned back, the man was gone. I stood, scanning the station. The silence felt oppressive, pressing down on me like a weight. I started to walk toward the station exit, thinking I'd rather call a cab than wait for the train. But as I passed the bench where I had been sitting, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a newspaper on the bench. Old, yellowed, its edges frayed. It hadn't been there before. The date on the front page was from 50 years ago, and the headline read, "Mysterious Disappearance at Midnight Train Station." The photo beneath the headline showed the very platform I was standing on, along with a blurry figure that looked eerily similar to the man I had seen. My hands trembled as I picked up the paper. The wind howled through the station, and suddenly the lights flickered more violently. When they stabilized, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Figures began to appear, one by one, on the platform. Men, women, even children, all dressed in outdated clothing. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. They didn't move, they just stood there, staring at me. My chest tightened as panic surged through me. Then the train arrived. It screeched to a halt in front of me, but it wasn't the train I was expecting. This one was old, its windows dark, its metal rusted. The doors creaked open, and a cold, foul-smelling air rushed out. The figures on the platform turned toward the train and began to board one by one, disappearing into the shadows inside. I froze, unable to move, until the last figure, the man in the black coat, turned to me. This time I could see his face. His skin was ashen, his eyes sunken, and his lips twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're next," he whispered, his voice echoing unnaturally. The train doors slammed shut, and the whistle blew. I stumbled backward as the train began to pull away, its wheels screeching against the tracks. The lights flickered again, and when I looked back, the platform was empty. No newspaper, no figures, no train, just me and the oppressive silence. I didn't wait for the real train. I ran out of the station and didn't stop until I was home. But every night since, I've heard the whistle of that old train growing louder, closer. And I know one night it'll come for me.
Story number 10.
It started with a group chat message from an unknown number. "Let's play hide and seek. Midnight. Forest behind Lakeview." At first, I thought it was a prank, but the message wasn't just sent to me. It went out to 5 of my friends. It seemed harmless, even exciting. Something about the mystery pulled us in, and by midnight we were all gathered at the edge of the dark woods. The rules were simple. One seeker, the rest of us hiding. First to be found would become the next seeker. There was no prize, no reason to play other than the thrill of it. Danny volunteered to seek first, counting down from 30, while the rest of us scattered into the trees. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just the sound of our footsteps crunching against the dirt. I found a thick tree to crouch behind, heart racing as I tried to steady my breathing. "Ready or not, here I come." Danny's voice echoed through the darkness. At first it was fun, adrenaline coursing through me every time I thought I heard him nearby. But then, the minutes stretched on and I began to notice something odd. The forest felt wrong. It was as if the trees were closing in, their twisted branches reaching for me. A scream pierced the silence. I froze. It was Sarah's voice, sharp and panicked, cutting through the night. Then it was gone, replaced by an eerie quiet. "Sarah?" I whispered, stepping out from behind the tree. No answer. I texted the group chat. "Was that Sarah? Is everyone okay?" The message didn't send. No signal. Another scream, this time closer. It was Chris. My stomach turned as I realized something was very, very wrong. This wasn't just a game anymore. I started running, weaving through the trees, calling out for my friends. The forest seemed endless, every direction identical. I tripped over a root, landing hard on my hands and knees. That's when I saw it, shadows moving in the distance, but not like people. They were too tall, their limbs too long, bending in ways that weren't natural. I held my breath as one of the figures stepped closer. Its face, or what should have been a face, was smooth and featureless, like stretched skin over a skull. It tilted its head as if sensing me, and I scrambled backward, choking on my fear. "Help!" I screamed, but my voice sounded small, swallowed by the vast darkness. Something grabbed my ankle. I looked down and saw a pale hand, fingers impossibly long, reaching out from beneath the dirt. I kicked and screamed, tearing myself free, and bolted deeper into the forest. The shadows were everywhere now, gliding between the trees, their movements unnaturally fast. I couldn't tell which direction I was running, only that I had to get away. Then I saw Danny, or at least I thought it was him. He was standing in a clearing, facing away from me. "Danny!" I shouted, rushing toward him. He didn't move. When I reached him, I grabbed his shoulder and turned him around. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. His mouth was open as if he were mid-scream, but no sound came out. Behind him, one of the shadows loomed, its featureless face inches from his. Its hand was pressed against his back, and as I watched in horror, Danny was pulled backward into the darkness, vanishing without a sound. I turned and ran, tears streaming down my face. I didn't stop until I saw the faint glow of the streetlights at the edge of the forest. I was the only one who made it out. The next day, I went to the police, but they found nothing. No sign of my friends, no footprints, nothing to suggest we were ever in the woods. That night, I received another message from the same unknown number. "Let's play again. Midnight. This time, don't run."